One.
Welcome to Mousehole, Chapter 1. As the car sped over the brow of the hill, the whole sweep of Mounts Bay came into view, and the early afternoon sunlight shimmered on the ripples of the blue-green water. It was the summer holidays, and there were two sisters sitting in the back of the estate car. "We must be nearly there," said Georgia, a bright and curious 13-year-old girl who had long, straight blonde hair. Olivia, who was just over a year and a half younger, said nothing. She was half asleep and was twirling her shorter, darker brown hair around her finger. "Whoever spots St. Michael's Mount first can have an extra flake in their ice cream," said their father, Neil. He had been driving since the early morning and had been thinking about ice cream on and off for the last hour of the journey. Olivia immediately sat up, and both children peered beyond fields that a few months earlier had been filled with bright yellow daffodils. Then Olivia shouted with delight at her first glimpse of the sea after the long journey. It was Georgia who spotted the mount first, through a small gap in the hedgerow off to the left. "There it is!" she yelled, and sure enough, at that moment, the whole castle on St. Michael's Mount came into view. It was perched high on its own small rocky island, surrounded by the sea. "What a wonderful sight," said Nicky, the girl's mother. There was a pile of leaflets from the tourist office on her lap, and one of them suddenly slid off her denim skirt as the car went round a corner. "They say you can walk all the way out to it when the tide is at its lowest. Shall we do that while we're here?" "Oh, yes," cried Georgia. As they neared the sea, they turned right and followed the bay around to Penzance. The car smoothly wound its way through the town with its bustling streets and shops, and then past the large, busy harbour. At the far end of the harbour, Olivia spotted a huge wooden pirate outside a shop. He looked fierce and was holding a pistol in one hand. She stared at us as they drove by. "Dad," she said, then asked, "were there real pirates in Penzance?" "Oh, yes, definitely," and smugglers, replied her father enthusiastically. It was often hard to tell whether he was being serious or joking. After a few moments' silence while he concentrated on driving, he spoke again. In fact, I've just remembered something. Alan, you know, the guy at work who's lending us the cottage, he told me there's a smuggler's tunnel in it." "What?" shrieked Olivia. "Really?" argued Mum. "Well, why didn't you tell us this before?" "Where does the tunnel go?" Georgia said excitedly. Hang on, said Dad, fighting for space to speak. "You can't actually go into it." "Oh," said the girls, both in disappointment. The cottage was renovated back in the 1960s before Alan bought it. Some workmen found a weird space behind a fireplace, and they say what looked like an entrance to a tunnel. Anyway, it was unsafe and they blocked it all back up again. But Alan said that they put a porthole in the wall for a bit of fun, so you can look in. "Oh, that's so cool," said Georgia. "I can't wait to get there." On they drove, around the bay to the fishing village of Newlyn, where the salty smell of fish and the sea filled the air. On past the old quarry at Penley Point, where they looked back and saw the whole of the bay with the mount seeming to rise from the centre of it. Then the car slowed and turned left down a little hill towards the sea. It was then, at last, that they saw Mousehole Harbour. It was beautiful, with blue and white fishing boats dotted here and there on the calm, glistening water. Children were playing on the small golden beaches, and some were jumping off the end of the harbour wall. The sun shone over a scene that had hardly changed in 100 years. They drove slowly through the village, past the ship inn and around the narrow road that had not been built with cars in mind. As they arrived at a car park at the far end of the harbour, a seagull swooped down low in front of the car, forcing Dad to brake hard. Everybody laughed. The children could hardly contain their excitement. Their first impression of Mousehole had lived up to their expectations, and they could not wait to go exploring. Dad parked on the harbour wall, and the girls got out and ran as fast as they could to the little beach. It was perfect. It was exactly how they imagined a Cornish harbour would look. Georgia kicked off her shoes and wiggled her toes down into the cold sand. Meanwhile, Olivia knelt down and began to search for shells and weathered sea glass. Her deep brown eyes scanned back and forth for tiny treasures. But Mum soon called them to come and get their suitcases from the car. "Oh!" cried Olivia. She suddenly remembered what Dad had told them earlier. "Let's go and see the tunnel in the cottage."